the program director at Men4MAAV Boys to Men. Our organization has a mission to reduce and end gender-based violence, specifically male violence towards self and others. And so the work that we do is so much aligned with the work that all of y'all do. I'm super excited to be collaborating here tonight. What we're going to do is run through a couple scenarios and then sort of dissect them and debrief them, potentially in breakout rooms, potentially just as a large group if we have a smaller group here. And so Sasha, when you're ready, you can go ahead and share the slideshow that we have presented, or we have prepared. Sasha is going to be running all of the tech behind the scenes for us here today. And we're going to be using this application called Pear Deck. You can choose to use it, or you can choose to just follow along. It's up to you, but it allows people to be a little bit more engaged, a little bit more interactive with the technology. So if it feels stressful to try and figure that out, don't worry about it. But it is an option. What you can do is you can go to joinpd.com on a phone or on another tab, and it'll allow you to put in answers to some of the questions that we're asking, allow anonymous responses to pop right up onto the slideshow. We use it a lot for youth. When you go to joinpd.com, it's going to ask for a code, and that code is right here, large on your screen, XYLPYI, or Zurich Yards Loudly Pursue Young Incentives. If that helps you at all, doesn't really help me. But I see 6 people have connected. That's great. Again, it's joinpd.com, and then that code is going to remain in the upper right-hand corner the whole time. And so if you ever get disconnected or you're having any trouble, it's going to remain that XYLPYI right there in the upper right-hand corner throughout. And just to sort of test that it's working and to have a little bit of fun before we jump into what we're talking about today, you should see now on your mobile device this question of, if you were a potato, what way would you be cooked, or which way would you like to be cooked? And you can put your response into that question, and you can sort of see how this works. It'll auto-populate up here on the screen as folks put that in. So again, if you don't want to struggle with the tech, it's no problem. You'll be able to follow along just fine. But if you do want to, it can be sort of fun. So we'll wait for a couple answers to get up, and then we'll jump into what we're going to do today. And folks from my team, feel free to put your best potato answers in as well. So now seeing up here, I'm seeing mashed, steamed like a sauna experience. That sounds nice. Sweet potato baked into a chip, French fried, slow cooked, made into fries, mashed in soup. So you get a sense a little bit about how this application works, in the sense about how people want to be cooked if they are potatoes. And so what we can do as those are coming in, you can stay on that app. And what we're going to do, as I mentioned earlier, is we're going to read through a couple scenarios, and then we're going to sort of talk about them, debrief them, and what we call a barometer activity. And so rather than entering or typing in an answer for these ones, what you're going to do is there should be a little icon, the one at the end of this big paragraph here. It says, look for the icon, and you'll be able to grab it and move it to wherever you feel along this sort of gradient we have here, right? All the way from 1 being like, I don't feel good about what I'm hearing in this scenario right now, to 5, like, I feel really good about this situation. And the point of this is that then as we're going along, even if we won't be able to hear everyone's voice, which maybe we will in a smaller group, we can still sort of get a pulse on how the group is doing, how they feel about what's happening in this scenario. And so, like I said, it's going to be 2 scenarios. We're going to read one, and then we're going to sort of talk in groups, potentially as one large group, dissect it, debrief it a little bit, and then do another one. Does anybody have any questions about any of that before we jump in? Great. Well, if you do, you can always message anyone from my team, or just put it in the chat. We can answer it, or you can just interrupt me, raise your hand, do whatever you need to do. So what I'm going to do, if it works, is just start to read the scenario. And after each piece here, you can sort of move your icon to how you're feeling about the situation. And this first situation involves 2 people, Sean and Emma. It starts, middle school dances only come a few times a year, so Sean and Emma are really looking forward to it. They've been flirting for a few months, and this is the first thing they'll do together. So that's the first part of the scenario. You can, again, take your little icon piece and move it to how you feel, considering just that little piece of information. And then you can see here in live time where people are moving them. And so a lot of people, somewhere between unsure to I feel good, leaning to the feeling good about it. And because this is a small group, could I hear maybe just from one person about why they're feeling what they're feeling here? One person want to unmute and just share out. Could be anybody from either team or a participant.
I'll jump in. So I feel a little unsure about this from the perspective of doing this work for a long time and being a parent in that middle school, people who are in middle school haven't had a lot of opportunity to practice being in relationship. And I get worried about people's expectations of each other that might be unsaid or unspoken.
Yeah, Heidi, so you're reacting just off the basis that this is a middle school dance and that has the potential to go a million different ways. As a parent, I appreciate that. Not myself being a parent, but you being a parent. Great, let's go to the next piece here. I want to read the next piece of the story. And we're just going to continue to read it in chunks. So Emma sends Sean a snap that reads, "Can't wait until Friday," kissy emoji. Sean replies, "I can't wait to have you all to myself," winky face emoji. How do we feel about that? Go ahead, again, move the logo to where you feel. From 1 to 5, I don't feel good, to I feel good about what's going on. So now a shift, right? A lot of people have moved to the left, feeling less good about what's going on. Maybe, again, just one person, what do you not feel good about this piece?
I'm happy to jump in. A middle school dance is the opposite of being like alone with one other person. You're literally that's not gonna meet the appropriate expectations.
Yeah. So maybe Sean doesn't really know what he's getting into if he expects he's going on one-on-one date with Emma. There's going to be a lot of other people around. And I know sometimes I put myself over on the left side here for this story because I think the emojis can be really ambiguous. Like we don't really know, and maybe they don't really know what they're alluding to or talking about at this point. It feels like it's all sort of vague. So with that, let's go to the next piece. A full day has gone by and Sean is wondering why Emma has not responded to his snap. He asks his friends if he should say something to her. One of them says, "Hey, don't worry about it. She's yours at the dance." He responds, "Yeah, sure, okay." Folks, again, not feeling very good about it. Do we want to hear from one person here? What are you feeling here? What makes you feel not good about what we just heard?
I think it's interesting how his friend has a similar expectation of exclusivity. So I think that's an interesting concept that's in play here.
Yeah, I agree. Or almost like I'm not even sure what they're talking about at this point. It's sort of just like hyping each other up, like, yeah, sure, no problem. Even though, like, again, it maybe is not exactly how the dance is going to look. So we'll go to the next piece. Sean and Emma meet up at the dance, and they're both still excited for the night. Then Emma sees her friends and walks over to them to say hi. Sean walks off to the side of the gym alone, looking over at the crowd and occasionally glaring at Emma. People are not feeling so good. For the sake of time, I'll jump to the next one, and then maybe we'll hear from some folks after the next one here. Emma's favorite song, "Blinding Lights," comes on, and all of Emma's friends yell as they run towards the dance floor. One of Emma's friends asks why she isn't going with them. She explains, "Sean doesn't dance, so I'm not going to dance either because I don't want to make him upset." So a lot of folks really in the red here, not feeling good about what's going on. Yeah, Charlie, go for it.
I mean, clearly she's afraid of his anger, so he's displayed some very toxic behavior in the past.
Yeah, so maybe there's some like real fear where she feels like she can't do things she wants to do because Sean doesn't do them. So maybe there's some type of control in this relationship. Thank you for picking up on that, Charlie. Anybody else want to comment on what's going on at this point in the story or how they're reading it?
I can jump in. I'm just concerned that she feels like she needs to alter or limit her behavior to kind of, that she thinks she has to play a role of kind of mediating his anger. Doesn't want to make him upset.
And just to add on to that, that she has to change her activities and her decisions. Sean doesn't. Sean doesn't dance. That's a fixed mindset. But Emma has to change what she likes or her preferences and what she's doing this evening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chris Kelleher, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to kind of build in some empathy for these characters and try to understand maybe where they're coming from. I know that we have limited information, but obviously what's happening right now doesn't feel good, doesn't really feel healthy, and I wonder about the messages Sean has received from his peers or role models in his life, or even our culture in general, that he might be performing this form of masculinity. Where he's feeling like he needs to, be in power or be in control. It might not necessarily align or feel good with him right now, but maybe he doesn't have any good, healthy examples of what a healthy relationship might look like. And I, empathize with, Emma too, and the messages that perhaps she received growing up in our culture around the passivity of being in a relationship with a man, kind of like making those concessions to please him. So it seems like at such like a young age, these pressures and expectations are playing out in his performance that who knows, and maybe it doesn't really feel good to either of them.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Chris. It's as if we work together, but it really does feel like that is what's going on in a lot of ways, right? So let's go to this next piece.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Craig. We got time.
The other thing I was going to say is like, I wonder like how anyone at this school, I'm assuming, defined a dance, right? Like it seems like it's like it feels like Sean does not understand the event.
Yeah, I will say we do this with middle school boys often, this exact scenario, and we ask them like, how much do you like dancing at middle school dances? And they're like, oh, we don't dance, like like that's so awkward. And so I do relate with Sean a little bit, even though it is a dance. Dancing as a middle school boy, it's putting yourself out there. It's vulnerability in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of different forces at play here. I'm excited to dive into it a little bit more, but let's, I think we got a couple more pieces here. I'd like to read the next piece. So a few moments later, Emma's close friend Zane runs over to Emma and asks her if she wants to start dancing with them. So she begins dancing with Zane and Chloe. She's smiling and laughing now. It looks like she's finally having fun. How do we feel about that? Emma's close friend Zane runs over to Emma, asks her if she wants to start dancing. Starts dancing with Zane and Chloe. She's smiling and laughing now. It looks like she's finally having fun. So a lot of people are feeling good. Some people are unsure. Could I maybe hear from one or two people here? Why are people feeling so much better about this?
I'm glad she's having fun.
Yeah.
It's like the first time that she seems like she's enjoying the evening.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that what you're going to say as well, Ryan?
Yeah, same thing. And I think like they're together to do this, right? So there's, not to get into the nitty gritty here, but there's a consent to be dancing with one another. And that's, I guess, why they went to the dance in the first place. So that's good.
So we have one final piece of the story, and then we can sort of debrief it as a whole. So Sean sees Emma dancing with her friends, and he gets annoyed. He walks into the group and pulls Emma away from Zane and Chloe. Emma stays with Sean for the rest of the dance, but she's not smiling or laughing anymore. So a lot of people not feeling so good about that situation. Yeah, it makes sense. Does anybody want to share out maybe a couple voices, and then we can unpack the thing as a whole? Why is this ending hard to hear in some ways?
I'd say that the power that Sean seems to have over Emma and her emotions is what's most frustrating or upsetting. Like she's having a good time, but because he isn't having a good time, now she's unable to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems
Go
like
ahead.
Sean's stance in this relationship is based in control. It doesn't matter that Emma is laughing, having fun with her friends out on the dance floor, which is what she wants to do. What she wants to do seems pretty irrelevant to Sean at this point.
And we do this activity. Go ahead, Heidi.
I just feel really sad. Like this is such a, I don't think this is uncommon. And I also, at the same time, I just think that, you know, for a young person, you know, these experiences are forming their sort of ideas and expectations and thinking about patterns in relationship. And it just makes me sad and nervous.
Yeah, that's really real. And I think, you know, I think there's this gender dynamic happening too in the end of the story where maybe Sean seeing Emma dancing with somebody named Zane and maybe assuming that that person is a boy, you know, Sean might be feeling feelings of jealousy, feelings of anger. And while those feelings are valid, the way that he expresses them here isn't necessarily acceptable. And so it's interesting to be thinking about sort of like, as Chris Kelleher mentioned earlier, the messages that boys and men receive around like protecting your girl or protecting your woman and how that's playing out. But when we're analyzing it, we clearly understand like this is not a good thing, right? Emma's not having fun. Sean's probably not having fun at this point either. And in all likelihood, their relationship's probably not going in a great trajectory at this point, right? It's probably not going in a good direction. And so what I'd love to do is to be able to discuss this a little bit more, and we'll pass it to you, Josh. Do you think, would you like to go into breakout rooms or would you like to just talk as a main group here?
I think it makes sense based on the numbers, based on who we have here to stay as one group. Yeah, I don't feel like we're, just looking at the whole screen right now. Yeah, I don't feel like we really need a breakout room. If that works for you, Danny.
Sure. Yeah. Would you like to ask any questions, or would anybody else from my team like to ask any questions thinking about this scenario as a whole and in regards to parenting, how potentially there are things that could have happened earlier in the story that could have made a difference? I guess we could start with that question. What could have happened earlier in this story, either from the parenting side or from other people involved in the story that could have made a difference in the outcome?
I feel like some guidance for Sean would have been super helpful. Like just what to expect, how, like what's appropriate, like how to handle his own feelings. Yeah, it feels like there's a lot to navigate, and he didn't seem to have any any prep, like any guidance ahead of time. So he's sort of like it's a recipe for disaster, dealing with these like potentially new feelings, a new situation, and like maybe not a lot of guidance on how to handle it.
Craig, going back to your earlier point about like what the school did or didn't say about the dance, do you think that guidance should have come from the school in terms of the teachers or just the school as a whole, sort of setting the expectations for the dance, or come from his family, his parents or caregivers in terms of establishing what he should or shouldn't be doing there?
Or
both? I don't know.
I think, yeah, probably more towards the parents, but I think there are, there may be some things rather than just saying, here's a dance, everybody, see you at 8. Like, I don't know, the school could provide some like sort of guidance, like, I don't know, or something to encourage, I don't know, dancing from the boys. I mean, in some way, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm too far away from that experience to pull much memories there. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, anything that can be done to sort of. Yeah, it's probably mostly parents, but I feel like there's probably some messaging that could help facilitate. Like, hey, here's what to expect. Here's what you should be thinking about. Here's how to handle this. from the school?
I had some curiosity and just full transparency. I'm not a parent, but I reflect back on the interaction that occurred via the text and what kind of boundaries or education is in place before young people, have this powerful device in their hands. And I don't have any answers. I'm just like curious because it seems like that is a central piece of some of the discomfort around here, the ownership piece, and that lack of really clear and thoughtful communication. So it's just a curiosity more than anything.
Yeah, I was going to speak, but people have heard my voice enough. Jordan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and I apologize. I have quite a bit going on outside my bedroom door here. I go back to Chris Kelleher's thought just about messaging and about how it does appear based on sort of Sean's initial text exchange with Emma, but the interaction that Sean had with his male identified peer, and then sort of how his behavior played out at the dance, that there does appear to be some greater cultural trend around those sort of gender expectations, and what boys are supposed to expect from girls, and what consequently Emma believes that she needs to do in that situation because of Sean's disposition, which really raises in my mind, from a parenting perspective or guardian perspective, or just, youth serving adult perspective, this idea that teaching kids at a young age that your happiness is not dependent on someone else to make you happy. And I think Emma could have used that advice, and certainly Sean could have used that advice, which certainly lends itself to that conversation around boundaries, as Chris alluded to as well.
I think some of it too, I think about this story and what would have happened if near the beginning, Sean is maybe really uncomfortable with dancing, and he tells Emma, he's like, I really get anxious dancing at a middle school dance. So like, could we have some one-on-one time at some point in the dance? And Emma goes, yeah, I'd love that. And also I really want to dance with my friends at one point in the dance too. Like, imagine that. Imagine if they went into the dance with that expectation and understanding of what each other wanted out of the event. I think it would have gone entirely different. And so I think for me, it comes down to like, how do we create those communication skills for the young people in our lives? How do we promote that where they can be open and honest with one another, talking about their wants and desires for a relationship or for just like a specific event within a relationship?
It's like bringing in the parent, perspective. It's unlikely that Sean or Emma's parents know. It's unlikely Sean's parents know about Emma, and it's unlikely Emma's parents know about Sean. I would give, I'd bet $100 on that. And so I think, from a parenting perspective, I think an important road to take is like over communicating constantly and making the assumption much longer before the evidence in the environment shows up that your children are curious about relationships, that they're practicing, that they're trying it on, that they're meddling, that they're putting the feelers out, that they are involved in relationships. It's very likely. And so just beginning to have all those conversations way before the concrete evidence appears in front of you, I think it's just really important. And the thing that I personally have done with my daughter is, if she's like, oh, mom, like, I don't want to talk about that. Or it's like, well, like, if you're not mature enough to talk about this, then I guess we're not ready for a middle school dance, or I guess we're not ready to go on a date, or I guess we're not ready to be alone in the living room with so-and-so. And then it's like, okay, I'll talk. So I think that piece about like really just assuming way ahead of time, right? Because we just tend to not consider it unless it's like right in front of us, but it's likely it's all happening. I think it's a really important piece to digest for parents.
I just want to echo that, Heidi. I love what you just said, because it really models healthy communication for our kids. And it really models healthy boundaries too. You sort of taking that extra step of saying, okay, well, this is kind of the conversation that needs to happen for you to have the skills to handle these types of situations and be in these types of environments, which I think sort of puts our kids in that seat of understanding that, okay, I need to respect my mom's boundaries here and her decisions here. So I just think that it's really healthy modeling.
So looking at the time, is there anything else anybody wants to add around this scenario, or Josh, anything else you'd like to ask before we do one more scenario that we have prepared here?
I was just, as a parent of young kids, it just sort of made me think if there's anything that could have happened or not have happened earlier on in Emma's life or in Sean's life to change the outcomes of this one night. I think we're in a position of knowing more than the participants in the story do. But if we can sort of use our benefit of hindsight and think about what could have happened in terms of their family experiences or their school experiences, that might have changed the way they approached this dance.
Yeah, at Maine Boys to Men, we like teach about communication through the lens of feelings and needs. Mm-hmm. So get like really working with your kids, your family culture around them being able to identify feelings and then state their needs, right? And if they become really practiced and that becomes very automated within a family setting, then it just carries over to friends or athletic teams or summer camp or dating relationships, right? So, I'm feeling hungry. I need a snack. It's so simple, right? But so let's identify. I'm feeling anxious. I need help picking out my first day of school outfit. I'm feeling whatever, just stopping and being like, what's the feeling? What's the need? Or I'm feeling, nervous because I need to belong. I need to feel like I belong, or, whatever. And there's great feeling wheels that you can, print out, and there's great needs lists. And it's so important, so basic, so easy. But if a young person has that skill down, they're not going to use it, because it's just part of how their brain works as they develop, because they're so used to using it. And
I was just going to add that, we do a program with 8th graders called Healthy Relationships, and we teach them that one of the first warning signs of an abusive relationship is possessiveness. So as soon as I hear the words, have you to myself, the very first thing he said, that's a complete red flag. And I would hope that kids who had some education on healthy relationships would see that too. And, the friend reinforced it too. Don't worry about it. You'll have her all to yourself. That's just not okay. And, again, with a little education, I would hope that the kids would, be taught that. I mean, another thing we always say is, in a new relationship, it can be really exciting and you want to just be with that person, but you never, ever turn your back on your friends. That you integrate that relationship into your life, and you have that relationship and your friends. And so again, that's a major warning sign if the relationship pulls you away from your friends. So again, I would just hope with some education on those kinds of issues, kids would be able to see those red flags and those warning signs right off the bat. And the other thing I thought about was, I kind of got the feeling this was a new relationship, but for her to know that he was going to be upset, some of the dynamics that were in that scenario reminded me of a relationship that would be a little bit further developed, because if those kinds of things happen the first time, she'd probably just say, forget this. But she's already has some investment. She already has some, reason she doesn't want to upset him. So that made me think maybe the relationship, there was a little more to it before they met up at this dance.
That's a really good point, Rebecca. It makes me wonder about the sort of the texting piece, and how, a lot of, especially at that young an age, whether it's 6th, 7th, 8th grade, something along those lines, sort of the development of those relationships taking place on sort of a digital platform or like a virtual type of space. I think that is just sort of a side note at this point, but like definitely something for parents, educators to be aware of in terms of the reality that could be the medium by which a lot of these relational dynamics are developing and taking place too.
Danny, I just want to close with one piece about friend relationships. So the other thing I think we can offer our children as parents is how to be a good friend, right? And how to look out for our friends and how to check in with our friends. And if we see our friend, something's going on, that's making us feel nervous about our friend, that's something to pay attention to, and to get another friend or get a teacher or something and ask for help. And I think that, kids can relate to the feeling of like crummies in my tummy, or this just doesn't feel right, or I saw this at the dance, and that, looking out and checking in with your friends when you see something that doesn't seem right. I think that's a really important role for everyone, regardless of their gender, to be, in any direction, right? Is like, how can we support our friends? Even if our friends are doing something that doesn't seem right, like it's okay to say to your friend, like, look, this isn't right. Like, leave this person alone, or whatever it is. Like, that's an important role for parents to talk about with their kids.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about regarding this scenario before we do our other one? Great. So we have one other scenario that we want to present to y'all. Again, the code is in the upper right-hand corner. It's joinpd.com, and it's XYLPYI in case folks need to join once more. Sasha, if you'd like to pull that up, maybe just one more time, the code for us here. Yep. So XYLPYI, I see 7 people are still connected. Again, that'll stay in the upper right-hand corner. It's joinpd.com in case you need to get back on there. We have one more scenario. And then we'll talk about this, and we can talk about the two in conjunction with one another and think about maybe what's different about the two and how parenting styles and techniques might come into play. So again, I'll just go ahead and read this piece, and then you can move your little pointer wherever. A big group of friends goes camping. When they get there, 2 friends pull out a bag they brought that has some beers in it, and it turns into a small party in the woods. We'll say these are high school kids, not middle school anymore, for what it's worth. So I want folks to go ahead and put their little pointer wherever they feel. Some people not feeling so good, some people unsure. Could I hear maybe from one person, whether unsure or not feeling good, about what's going on at this point in the story, why you feel the way you do?
I think there's a huge difference between freshmen and seniors in high school as far as normalcy of alcohol consumption. And so we don't know the exact age. We don't know how many beers there were. So I'm completely unsure.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I think that's a really good point, where we don't have very much information at this point. So it's hard to know. And welcome, Mike. Good to have you here. We're doing a scenario and sort of talking about a couple of high schoolers, and you came in right at the beginning. A big group of friends goes camping. When they get there, 2 friends pull out a bag. They brought some beers in it. It turns into a small party in the woods. So at this point, we don't know much, but some people are not feeling good. I imagine due to the fact, young people, alcohol, woods, there's a lot of potential for things to go bad here. But again, we don't know too much about who they are or why they're there, as Charlie mentioned. So let's go to the next piece here, get some more information. Christine and Scott are on the trip. They've always been a little flirty, but in a strictly platonic way. Christine brought a tent and offers to share it with Scott. They've shared tents before on camping trips, and neither of them are snorers, so it always works out well. Welcome, Michelle. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Go ahead and for the new folks who are just joining, we're on an application called Pear Deck, and you can join if you'd like by going to joinpd.com and then putting in this code right here. And this code will remain in the upper right throughout. You can also just follow along and not do the tech, and that's totally okay. So, looks like there's a pretty wide spread here. Maybe one or two people feeling not good or really good about the situation, and a lot of people here in the middle. Why? Could I hear from somebody? What are you thinking at this point in the story?
Yeah, I think the relationship dynamics that are brought up so far they seem really healthy. I do think that the mention of beer and the fact that these are high school kids still causes some pause for me. Just because anytime there's alcohol involved, whatever the quantity is, it inhibits judgment. So still has me feeling a little unsure.
Thanks, Jordan. Does anybody else want to share? I saw somebody else maybe unmute or want to say something.
I don't quite get that. Flirty, but in a strictly platonic way. I don't know. I think if you're flirty, it's not strictly platonic. So that.
Yeah, there's no such thing, right?
I don't. Yeah, I don't really get that.
Yeah, that is goofy language. We've had all of these scenarios informed by the young people that we work with, and so I think at times there are situations that feel like, oh yeah, we flirt, but like we're just friends, and so maybe that's a little bit of that energy coming out right now. Heidi, were you going to add anything to this? I saw you're unmuted.
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So let's go ahead and go to this next piece here. Thank you, Sasha. So after the fire dies down and they climb into the tent, they stay up whispering and laughing. Scott is really funny, Christine thinks. They slowly move closer and get quieter until Christine says, "Listen, Scott, I think I've been having some feelings for you. I'd really like to kiss you right now." How are folks feeling about that? Wow, a really big range here. I'd love to hear from some folks. Why are people feeling where they're feeling at this point?
I like the communication part of it.
Yeah.
Where people, instead of just acting on something, talk about it first.
Yeah, I like that a lot too, Mike. Thank you. What else? What else are people feeling at this point?
I'm in this unsure / closer to number 2 area because I'm not certain if she's intoxicated at all. So I'm trying to figure out, has she always had these feelings, or is this induced from alcohol and lowering her inhibition? So that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, totally real. Thank you, Ryan.
So I'm way over on the left. I'm not feeling good about this at all. They've been friends in the past. One of the people's kind of hitting on the other one. I worry that Scott might feel uneasy and like he has to sort of take the opportunity, right? That maybe he has to perform masculinity, right? Boys don't always feel as though they get to say no to girls. And that maybe there's pressure, there's other people around. I don't know, and they're in a tent together, right? So is somebody going to pack up and go home if this doesn't go well, if he says no? Or so I just worry about that.
That's interesting. The tent, I hadn't considered the tent until you mentioned that. Yeah, there is no clear out to say no. Like, you're sleeping in the grass. Like, what happens? Yeah.
Hopefully the forecast is clear if he chooses that place.
It says they slowly move closer, so that right there implies some kind of consensual, intimacy.
Yeah, so Charlie, reading sort of the body language there and noticing maybe that there is some type of mutual interest. That's a really good pickup. I don't always notice that when I read this. So let's do, because I think we could dissect this forever, but I want to get to this last piece here. Scott gives a huge smile because he's been thinking he wants something more with Christine too. I'm glad you said that because I really like you too. I also think maybe we should wait before we try anything though. I don't really want my first kiss with you to be after a night of drinking. They continue to whisper until they drift off for the night. In the morning, Scott rolls over and asks if it'd be okay if he kissed her. Christine says, of course, and puts her arms around him. So then one last time, again, go ahead and move that little pointer where you'd like. So a lot of people feel great about this, right? It's a super feel good ending here. Does anybody want to share sort of their reaction to hearing me read this?
Feels like you couldn't have written that better. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like, seems like all the concerns are sort of start to be put down. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but
this shows me that Scott was raised in a family where parents educated him and helped him. Listen, it all begins at home. And if we don't sit down with our kids and help them, whereas the last scenario, the kids weren't spoken to. I know, I have young kids, but I've always taught my son, not to hit girls, how to respect girls from a very young age. He holds doors for his mother. He holds a door for his sister because we instilled that and taught him that's how you have to be and to respect, male, female, or just to respect people. And you don't see that a lot of times with parents. Parents just don't find the time. They don't find the time to sit down with their kids to help them with additional work. They figure that's what the teacher at school does. So the education part of this is it happens. It all begins at home. And these two situations, I look at it and I see that, Scott and Christine are raised in good homes and open communication with their parents, whereas the other one, I don't see that.
I like how you talked about communication, and because like in the previous scenario, it's so clear that like there's so much communication missing from that previous situation. And in this one, Scott says, he says, I'm glad you said that because I really like you too, right? So even though he's asking to wait until the next morning, he's kind of reflecting back and saying like, I really like you too, right? So it's just that piece of communication is really key, both in healthy relationships and in unhealthy relationships. That being able to kind of speak and sort of say what you're observing, what you're needing, what you're wanting is just really, really important.
Any other reactions to the end of this story here, or any thoughts you had hearing the end? It seemed like for a long time it could have also gone a different way, right? And then it sort of has this like positive ending. Curious if anybody else has any thoughts around this before we dig into some of the questions about why this is, sort of what Joe was referring to around like, how do we create this as our future?
It seems like at every juncture in the story, both parties are like okay with what's happening. It never seems to be like in the last story where there was a clear mismatch in expectations and a clear mismatch in feelings about what was going on around them in their context. Even though Christine wants to kiss the previous evening and Scott wants to wait. Christine's okay with that, and Scott was okay with how things ended that night. The next morning, we see both parties like very much okay with what's going on. And so I think just like the big picture is that you, at all of those like decision-making thresholds, that's like the key thing that has to happen. Like both people need to be feeling good, or at least, openly communicating about their feelings at each decision-making point.
So to ask this question sort of that we've been sort of dancing around anyway and sort of talking about throughout, but what can we do to make this our reality, to make this our future? Like how, as parents, as youth serving adults, what does this look like in building out this scenario rather than the scenario past?
I think the number one thing here is you seem to have two kids that are pretty confident and comfortable speaking to someone else about their feelings and what they want and what they don't want. And that that's something that I think can be fostered.
Yeah, I agree. I think going back to what Joe said is I suspect at some point someone had an important conversation with Scott and gave him some education. And I think those are really hard conversations to have, and knowing when to have them is really tough too. Because I think I can't remember if it was Jordan or somebody else early on, or it might have been Charlie. Like, are these kids freshmen, or are they seniors, or are they college, right? So as a parent, that's a huge range. That could be you having this conversation with your 13 or 14-year-old or your child before they go off to school. So I'd say, like, back to what Heidi said, is if your child is starting to ask for these more grown up situations, those are probably when those conversations need to happen, unless the experts say differently, but that's my guess.
Yeah, and to your point, Ryan, again, going back to something Heidi said, not surprisingly, is starting the form of those conversations at those early ages with those sort of less intense conversations around what are your feelings, what are your needs, developing your child's confidence, as I believe it was Mike pointed out, and their ability to communicate about those things, fostering those skills in a more sort of low ball way, if you will, so that when they get into those really intense interpersonal situations, they don't freeze up, not know what to say, feel like they have to do something based on some cultural expectation. So
when we have 12 hours with high school students, which is an amazing gift, before we even get into these scenarios, we've done a bunch of other work around gender stereotypes, all that kind of healthy relationships, all that stuff. But the other piece of work that we've done is we've talked about the difference between passive communication, assertive communication, and aggressive communication. And we really, and for the first, many of the students in the room was like, I've never heard of this before, and like, what are you going to get if you're passively communicating? What are you going to get if you're assertively communicating? What are you going to get if you're aggressively communicating with, your peers, your friends, your dating partner? So that, that whole piece is an interesting part of all this. But the other thing that I think is probably the most important in terms of consent, which is really what this last scenario is all about. It's like a really great scenario around consent, is, and this begins when your kids are really little. If you've got 3 kids over and you're watching a scary movie and 2 of the kids are fine with it, but one of them is not, what do? You always defer the activity to, the the person who is like the least comfortable, right? So if somebody isn't happy or comfortable with that scary movie, you don't watch that scary movie anymore. And that goes back to, I'm not sure who said it because I couldn't see all the faces, but in that scenario, we're like, we're okay with waiting, right? We're okay with, because we have practice. We understand that like we can be together as a group and we can like go down to the level of the person's comfort level. So like if you're on a hike and there are 3 of you and one person's going ahead and one's in the middle and one's lagging behind, you like wait for the person who's lagging behind, right? So if you're all 2 of you are wearing masks and one person isn't, and you really want that other person to wear a mask, like because that makes somebody more comfortable, like that is ultimately that is the common sense approach to consent, right? Like we're always considering people's comfort levels and we're checking in with them and we're we're taking our actions and our behavior and we're altering it to meet the needs of the people around us. That in terms of little kids and then on up, right? I think that there's some of that is at work in this scenario as well.
I always think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So something Mike and I talk about, because we have 3 boys and they'll be roughhousing and, I'll be saying, when it starts to get out of hand, I'm like, wait a minute, like it shouldn't take for someone to start crying. It shouldn't take for someone to get hurt. You have to pay attention. Like, are people having fun? Are you still having fun? Is everyone having fun doing this? And if you're not, you have to change the channel. You have to do something else. And I'm not saying we get that messaging right all the time. And I'm not saying they follow orders all the time, but, just trying to lay down some of that language to practice because it's hard stuff.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, Michelle, I think like anything else, thinking about it, metaphor of like it's like a muscle that you need to strengthen and build, because like advocating for yourself as a young person is really hard, and saying what you need or saying what you want or speaking to sort of the feelings and the needs that Heidi was alluding to earlier, it can be really hard for people that haven't had the opportunity to practice that very much. And so letting people, and Jordan was saying this too, so I'm piggybacking off everyone, but giving young folks really an opportunity to practice that at an early age in low consequence situations, so that when they are potentially in that tent together, it feels a little bit easier because they've done it before. Maybe not in terms of romance, but in terms of all the other things that we've sort of been alluding to throughout.
I felt like in hearing that last story too, there was an inner strength that I saw in both of the participants, and that they seem to have like a really strong and healthy self-image. They live in the same world as Sean and Emma, and so they're both aware of those sort of gender norms and stereotypes, and what we think of as like typical behaviors, or what the media puts out as typical behaviors for boys and girls in those situations. And so in spite of that, it felt like they had a really authentic sense of self, where they individually made decisions that this is what I want to do. This is my choice in this situation. And I'm not going to make the decision that society says that boys usually make in this situation, or that girls usually should do in this situation. This is who I am, and this is what I want to do because I have a really strong sense of my own identity.
And some responsibility to the other person, right? So, she was checking in. She could have gone in for the kiss without asking, right? Mm-hmm. He was checking in, saying sort of what he needed as well. And then there's this other sort of piece that pops into my mind, and I know we're running out of time and moving on, but as a parent, thinking about, critically thinking about what situations do we think our kids are prepared to handle and not, and being okay with being the unpopular parent, because we just don't really think our kids are ready for a certain kind of dynamic that they just may not be ready for, like being alone in the tent with alcohol. Like our kid might not be ready for that, and they may even find relief and being told that they're not ready, and it's, that's not what you're going to do this summer, and just being willing to be the unpopular person. Like, it's just not the time. Like, I had just a quick example. My daughter is an older boy, and they were, quote, friends, and he wanted her to go to Boston and spend the night at a hotel. And he was a graduating senior, and she was maybe a graduating junior. And I was like, no, like, it's not, you don't know him well enough. It's not, there was just like, I'm sorry. And then like a year, 6 months later, turns out she came kind of around. She's like, remember when? She was like, you were so right. It's like, sometimes but at the time, like I was very unpopular in the household for that weekend, but like, it's just, sometimes our kids are relieved kind of after the fact that they don't get to do things that they might not really be prepared to do and to navigate hard situations, and that's okay.
Well, I'll pass it back to you, Josh. That was much of the scenarios and what we had prepared around those. Curious if you have any other questions or how you would like to close out this afternoon, evening, whatever it is.
Yeah, so I know we all owe, sorry, there's a bit weird connection on my end. We all owe a huge thanks to the group from Maine. We appreciate everybody who joined us tonight and shared their insights and helped make this evening happen and share the scenarios with us. We're really grateful and hope to continue working with you as well. Does anybody else have any last thoughts or last comments or questions they want to add before we close out fully?
Yeah, I actually did have a question on this last scenario. There's certainly a lot of things that could have gone wrong throughout that whole scenario. But one of which, if someone, if Christine in the tent had consumed a lot of alcohol at that point, there comes a question of consent, and there's the question of capability of consent if you're intoxicated. And I think one of the key things that boys need to be aware of is that even if you're in that situation, that doesn't necessarily imply consent. If someone is in a state that's where she's incapable of consent, I think boys really need to be aware of that, because I remember learning that when I was in school. I'm like, really? Wow. It just, the thought hadn't really crossed my mind that was not okay. I mean, not in a weird way, but that the line was further up than I thought, put it that way. And I remember going back as soon as I learned that. It was actually from a comedian that was doing campus acts, and I just remember trying to inform all my friends. It's like, look, guys, we gotta be careful about this, because it really wasn't something that was in my consciousness at the time. So that's certainly something I want to relay to my boys, so that we really need to be aware of that.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I think that's a really important point that you brought up.
I just want to say thanks to the main group. I know we had a small turnout, but we can share this widely, I think, and the conversation is always really wonderful with you bunch. I had the privilege of working with Jordan and Danny and Heidi earlier individually, and Sasha too, and you guys are great. So really appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a real pleasure to get to work with y'all and to bring some of our content to a new population. And it's always fun to have these conversations. So I really appreciate all of y'all for being here and engaging in what we had planned.
Well, thank you again. I think we'll close out. And as always, we'll continue to be in touch.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.